As I say, the most important slide that we will have, and we will go over this again and again and again. What was the problem I studied? How did I study it? What does it mean? What did I find? And what does it mean? Introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Now, let's talk about organization of our information that we have collected. There's 3 different methods that people use. We will talk about the first 2, what are called the outline method and the trapezoid method. Trapezoid is a 4-sided figure like that with 3 equal and 1 unequal side. This is a trapezoid, okay? The third method, the conceptual box method, is the way people decide on how a movie is made. That what they do is they make a series of boxes to tell a story. So that they have the first box maybe will be the first scene of the movie. And the next box, in their mind, they'll picture the second scene. And the third box will be the next scene. Some people actually can organize in their mind by seeing their research as a series of boxes that represent different parts of the story. That is very useful, but it is very difficult to explain. Some people, when they take baths or showers, can visualize boxes and use that to tell a story. But many of us can't. So we will concentrate on these 2 approaches, the outline method and the trapezoid method. Let's talk about the outline method. If you look, you actually have a copy of this sheet in full form that you can use. What we do is we think of key phrases or even sentences that we would use in the different parts of our paper. So for example, the first is, what was the problem or the topic that I studied? Now, when we do an introduction, we go from the broad to the specific. And we end up with 4 or 5 or 3 objectives. Now, I personally like an introduction that is about 4 paragraphs long, where you are stating in the first paragraph, what is the big problem? And then you narrow it down to a smaller version that relates to what you're doing, smaller, and then your specific study. And we'll look at this in a minute. In the methods and the procedures, in other words, we're asking, how did I study the problem? It's most important to have subheadings that describe the big procedures that you use, the big questions that you asked. And the way I like to organize it is I start off a sentence like this. In order to do this, I did this. So, for example, in order to extract DNA, I did this technique. So that forces you to think of what the big question is. In order to do this, I did this. Now, the key, though, is picking out your subheadings, your topics that you would use. And then, when we get to our results, where we ask the question, what did I find? We also have subheadings that we use as well. When we ask, what does it mean? We actually have the same set of subheadings. We're going to go over this with actual examples. And finally, we end with our conclusion, where we go back to our original objectives and we describe the results. So let's kind of look at this a little more. let's look at it in terms of the trapezoid method. In the trapezoid method, our introduction, remember we have 4 paragraphs. We start out very broad. Our first paragraph is a broad coverage. Our second paragraph is narrower. Our third paragraph is even more narrow, related to our specific project, and then we give our specific objectives. The methods and the results really are what they are. They are the study that we did and what we found. But we bring it back at the end to our discussion by going from the specific to broader, to broader, to broader. So we go from the narrow in terms of what our study did and what our study found to what it means in the bigger context, the bigger picture. So let's, for example, now look at this technique. We are going to do a study of grazing. Think of cattle that are in cows in a field that are eating grass. That's what grazing is. But we're going to talk about grazing that occurs not by cattle in a field, but by insects that are feeding on algae and plants that are in streams. So if we look at our introduction, our first paragraph is very broad. The importance of grazing in ecosystems. The importance of grazing in all ecosystems, terrestrial, aquatic, marine. Then we talk about the importance of grazing in aquatic systems. We narrow it down. Then we talk about specific types of studies of grazing, that is, experimental studies of grazing, and then we give the specific objectives of our study. Now, what I do with, let me just take this shot, with this piece of paper is we have about maybe 100 copies of this blank page in my laboratory. And I and my graduate students are always taking them, because whenever we go and we have to stand in line at a cafeteria or at a bank or at the post office, we are scribbling ideas on these sheets of paper. Just phrases, not sentences, just ideas, and constantly modifying them before we come up with the final outline that we're going to use. So it's a way of just kind of getting our ideas together, of thinking, what's the big picture, narrowing it down, and narrowing it down. Now, for the methods and the procedures in this particular study, the big subheadings we would have are the study area, where we conducted our research, the study organisms, the animals that we dealt with, the experimental design, how we conducted the experiment, the sampling, how we took our samples, and the statistics, how we analyzed our data. But you notice they are all parallel, they're all equal. We don't go from a big to a little, we're making each section a topic in itself. The study area, the study organisms, the experimental design, the sampling, and the statistics.